As 2022 draws to a close, we're looking back on the stories that dominated the headlines this year. Islands in the South Pacific became a lightning rod for geopolitical tensions. A single security deal by one of the islands sparking a flurry of diplomacy by China, Australia and the United States, all vying for influence in the region. Analysis on that coming up, but first here's the state of play in 60 seconds.
The security of America, quite frankly, and the world depends on your security and the security of the Pacific Islands.
The U.S. president in September at the first ever White House summit for Pacific Island nations, triggered, many say, by the signing of a security pact in April between the Solomon Islands and China. Beijing losing no time, sending its foreign minister to the region in May. Hot on his heels, his Australian counterpart in Fiji in the very same week.
Australia will be a partner that doesn't come with strings attached.
Why should an area where just one country has a population above 1 million, with a combined GDP that's a tiny fraction of China's, excite so much interest? The last time it did was in the 1940s, when winning a battle in the Solomons determined the outcome of World War II. A different conflict today, with different but no less hefty stakes. The question, what is really on the line?
And we're joined by Meg Keen, Director of the Pacific Island Program at Lowy Institute, to try and answer this question. Professor Keen, let's try and ease our way in looking at that pact, which Australia's Foreign Minister in her campaign trail earlier this year condemned or slammed as the worst Australian foreign policy blunder since World War II. Now, you have said you think that's an overstatement, but even if that's so, it does reflect the degree of, I suppose, unease, the disquiet in Canberra and by extension Washington over the presence, the Chinese presence in the Pacific Islands. Why should that be so?
Absolutely, because Australia and the United States see their security as tightly woven with Pacific Island country. Your intro mentioned the World War II, and that really highlighted the geopolitical importance of this region. There's also sea lanes that crisscross this region, and that's important for supply chains, for United States, for Australia, and for these countries. There's a common geography. Both United States and Australia share maritime boundaries with these countries, and they're very porous. So it matters what's happening in the security of these regions. The relationships have been strong and enduring, and they want to keep them that way. For example, Australia spends over $1.4 billion a year in this region trying to keep those relationships strong. And that's 4 times more than anybody else spends in the region. So these are sovereign countries. They can choose who they are going to have development and security relationships with, and anything that weakens that security partnership, that family, that Pacific family in this region is going to be of concern to Australia and to United States.
China's foray into this region, at least since 2006, if not even before that. And they have found favor in the Pacific Islands, not least because of its massive input in terms of investment, trade and loans. What does China want from the Pacific Islands?
Well, I think what China wants from the Pacific Islands is influence. It's a global power and it wants to have global reach. So that's one thing that's important to it, a presence. These countries, there's 12 countries with 12 voting rights in United Nations. The tussle between China and Taiwan and the tussle for influence is very important. Recently, they've won over Solomon Islands and Kiribati, so there's only 4 left now in the region that recognize Taiwan. And ideally for them, the one China policy will be the dominant one here and elsewhere in the world. They also want a presence in this region. They may be small island countries, as your intro mentioned, but there are enormous maritime territories associated with these countries, about the size of Africa. China is, of course, a maritime power, and it wants a presence in this area. It's a huge area right in the middle of the Indo-Pacific. As you've also said, they have been in the region for a long time, and they want to maintain that presence.
All right, China can want what it wants, Australia can want, Washington can want, but the Pacific Islands themselves, at least 14 countries, territories as well, they have free agency. And in a way, all this geopolitical interest gives them more choice. They can shop for better security partners, better concessional loans. They have more choice. And we have seen them exercise that choice when Wang Yi, China's foreign minister, was in the region in May, pushing for the Common Development Vision deal. That was not signed, apparently or reportedly because of concerns about further militarization of the region. How long can this region keep its own voice in the midst of this kind of competition?
Well, I think it can assert it because the competition gives an opportunity for influence. And what we're seeing in this region is the aid to it has never been higher. So the aid flows to this region, China, Australia, Japan, etc., is well beyond $4 billion a year now. They have more money for regional infrastructure, concessional loans. They're gaining access to greater labor mobility in Australia, in New Zealand. And they're getting stronger voices in international forums. And we're seeing that with climate change and with oceans governance, because others are aligning with them to get that influence. I think part of your question goes to the fact that geopolitical competition brings risks, and it brings risks of fragmentation and tensions in the region that are not desirable. And the Pacific has been very clear. It does not want a militarization or a securitization of this region. It wants people to get behind its vision for development and for the development partners to work with them in collaboration, not just looking after their own strategic interests.
But this, it's commonly touted version, Solomon Islands Prime Minister coming forward to say, we want to be friends to all, enemy to none. This kind of approach to foreign policy, given China and the West having essentially value systems that are not aligned. How long can you continue to be friends to all and enemy to none?
I think the problem is you can want to be friends to all for development assistance and to capture development opportunities. It is not possible to be friends to all when it comes to security issues. And the Prime Minister of Solomon Islands himself has said that Australia in particular remains the security partner of choice. However, if we do not fulfill the needs of Solomon Islands and other countries for security, they may well go looking elsewhere. So you can be friends, but you can have preferences as well. And in the Pacific at the moment, Australia, and to a lesser extent or to another extent, United States has that preference, but they need to maintain it. These are sovereign countries. They can choose to go elsewhere if we aren't meeting their needs.
A final question now, Professor Keen. Now, the notion of security, especially in this region, small, remote, and very vulnerable to natural disasters and climate change as well. They have defined their security challenge as including, in a very crucial sense, what's happening in terms of climate change. Is the West, is Australia, is New Zealand, is Washington, are they doing enough to have a proactive, creative, and sustainable policy on engaging with the Pacific Island beyond just reacting to China signing a security pact?
Well, the Pacific Islands have been very clear. Their greatest security challenge is climate change, not geopolitics, climate change. And they have made it clear that all countries need to step up. We are not on track to achieve the 1.5 degrees Celsius cap on climatic change. And in fact, we are very close to going over it, and they will be hit extremely hard if that occurs. So there's lots more that can be done on all sides, US, China, Australia, to step up our emissions reductions, to step up our climate financing, and to work with them to adapt to the climate issues. That involves collaboration, coordination, and if there's one place we can do it, it will be on climate action. And it will have to be on climate action because these countries are facing existential threats from sea level rises and cyclones and water shortages and many other calamities that come with climate change.
Thanks so much for joining us, Professor Meg Keen, Director of the Pacific Island Program at Lowy Institute.